We live in an age that worships reason. We trust numbers more than instincts, data more than intuition, logic more than lived experience. From childhood, we are taught a quiet belief that the world is understandable, predictable, and ultimately conquerable, if only we think clearly enough. We are told that progress comes from better explanations, better systems, better arguments. That truth is something you can calculate, measure, and defend with evidence. And for the most part, this belief feels justified. Science cures diseases. Technology reshapes reality. Rational planning builds empires and collapses them. Entire civilizations are structured around the assumption that human beings, given enough information, will arrive at correct conclusions. But beneath this confidence hides an unasked question. A question so uncomfortable that most people never notice it at all. What if the tool we trust most, reason itself, is quietly unreliable? What if logic is not the foundation of truth, but merely a story we tell ourselves to feel safe in a chaotic world? History is filled with moments where absolute certainty felt inevitable. Religions once claimed divine rational order behind every event. Political ideologies promised mathematically perfect societies. Scientific eras declared that the final answers were just one discovery away. And yet, each time, those systems collapsed, not because people lacked intelligence, but because they trusted intelligence too much. Every age believes it has escaped illusion. Every age is wrong. Reason feels solid because it gives a structure. It organizes the world into causes and effects, problems and solutions, right and wrong. It tells us that if something happens, there must be a reason why. That the future will resemble the past. That patterns will continue. But ask yourself something simple. Why do you believe the sun will rise tomorrow? Not poetically. Not emotionally. Logically. You might say, because it always has. Because physics demands it. Because science explains it. But notice what you just did. You assumed the future must resemble the past. You assumed that laws remain constant. You assumed continuity itself is guaranteed. And none of those assumptions can be proven without already assuming them to be true. This is where reason begins to tremble. We rarely notice this instability because everyday life does not require philosophical precision. We wake up, work, eat, sleep. The world appears stable enough. But beneath that surface lies a fragile structure made of habits, expectations, and psychological comfort, not certainty. Reason did not evolve to discover truth. It evolved to help us survive. And survival does not require accuracy. It requires usefulness. This is the uncomfortable idea we avoid, that what feels rational may simply be what feels familiar. That logic may be less about discovering reality and more about managing anxiety. There was a man who understood this before almost anyone else. He did not shout it. He did not dramatize it. He did not weaponize it. He simply followed reason to its logical conclusion. And what he found terrified him. This man did not attack religion in the way revolutionaries did. He did not reject science or embrace chaos. He did not argue emotionally or ideologically. He did something far more dangerous. He asked reason to justify itself. Step by step, calmly, patiently, he examined the assumptions beneath human knowledge. Cause and effect, certainty, identity, even the self. And everywhere he looked, he found not solid ground, but habit. We believe causes lead to effects because we have seen them paired together repeatedly. Not because reason proves the connection, but because the mind expects it. We believe the future will behave like the past because it always has before. Not because logic demands it, but because memory trains expectation. Reason, it turns out, does not create belief. It rationalizes belief after it already exists. This realization is deeply unsettling because it removes the throne from beneath logic itself. If reason depends on assumptions it cannot prove, then it is not a foundation. It is a tool balanced on invisible supports. And when that realization fully sets in, it changes everything. Truth becomes fragile. Morality becomes uncertain. Identity becomes unstable. If reason cannot tell us what must be true, then why do we trust it so completely? Why do we structure laws, ethics, science, and social systems around something that cannot justify its own authority? Most thinkers before him avoided this question. Most thinkers after him try to escape it, because once you see reason's limits, you cannot unsee them. This man himself struggled with the implications. At times, he admitted that his conclusions pushed him toward despair. When thought was followed to its end, it led not to clarity, but paralysis. And so he did what humans have always done when thinking becomes unbearable. He returned to life. Conversation, games, music, friendship, emotion. Not because reason solved the problem, but because reason could not. This is the quiet paradox at the heart of human existence. We pretend to be rational creatures guided by logic, yet our beliefs are shaped by instinct, repetition, authority, and emotion. We defend ideas fiercely, not because they are true, but because they feel like home. The man who exposed this was named David Hume. Not a destroyer of knowledge, not an enemy of reason, but its most honest examiner. His ideas did not collapse civilization overnight. That would have been easier to notice. Instead, they seep quietly into psychology, economics, politics, and modern persuasion. They taught those who understood them something unsettling. If humans are not ruled by reason, then they can be guided without it. Once you truly understand Hume, the world begins to look different. Belief stops feeling noble, certainty stops feeling virtuous, and confidence begins to look suspicious, because the most dangerous illusions are not the ones we doubt. They are the ones we never question, and reason may be the most seductive illusion of all. David Hume was born into an age intoxicated by reason. The Enlightenment promised something humanity had never dared to believe so completely before, that the universe was intelligible, that nature obeyed laws, and that the human mind, if disciplined correctly, could uncover them. Philosophers spoke of progress as if it were inevitable. Knowledge would accumulate, errors would disappear, ignorance would shrink until nothing remained but clarity. It was an age of confidence, and confidence invites scrutiny. Hume did not rebel against this intellectual climate. He embraced it. He admired science. He respected mathematics. He believed, like his contemporaries, that understanding the mind was the key to understanding reality itself. But Hume was unusually patient, unusually honest. Instead of asking what humans should believe, he asked a more dangerous question. Why do we believe anything at all? Take cause and effect, the backbone of science, the assumption behind every experiment, every prediction, every technology. We believe fire causes heat. We believe gravity causes falling. We believe medicine causes recovery. But when Hume examined this belief closely, something unsettling emerged. We never actually observe causation. We observe one event followed by another. Again, and again, and again. The mind then makes a leap. It assumes connection, not because logic proves it, but because repetition trains expectation. This insight becomes even more disturbing when pushed further. No matter how many times something happens, reason alone cannot prove it must happen again. The fact that the sun has risen every day of human history does not logically guarantee it will rise tomorrow. It only feels guaranteed. Science, then, does not rest on certainty. It rests on habit. This realization fractures the Enlightenment dream at its core. If induction, the process of inferring general laws from repeated observations, cannot be logically justified, then science operates on psychological trust rather than rational proof. Hume did not say science was useless. He said it was human, and that distinction changes everything. This was not a triumphant discovery for Hume. It was a deeply troubling one. If reason cannot justify induction, then it cannot justify science, prediction, or even common sense expectations about the future. The mind, in its search for stability, invents continuity where none can be logically proven. And Hume followed this logic further. What about the self? We assume there is a stable I behind our thoughts and emotions, a continuous identity that persists through time. But when Hume searched for this self through introspection, he found nothing permanent, only sensations, feelings, thoughts, memories, appearing and disappearing like frames in a film. The self, it seemed, was not a fixed entity. It was a story, again, not reasoned into existence, but assembled through habit. These conclusions frightened Hume himself. In his writings, He admitted that sustained philosophical reflection led him toward melancholy and confusion. If followed relentlessly, skepticism dissolved meaning, certainty, and motivation. Thought became a trap. So he stepped away. He played games. He spoke with friends. He returned to ordinary life. Not because philosophy was false, but because the human mind cannot live inside permanent doubt. This retreat is essential to understanding Hume. He was not a nihilist. He did not argue that nothing matters. He argued that human beings function through instinct and feeling long before reason enters the scene. Reason, in Hume's view, is not the ruler of human behavior. It is its servant. We feel first. We believe first. We act first. Then reason arrives afterward, constructing explanations that make those actions feel justified. This insight quietly dismantles centuries of philosophical arrogance. Humans are not rational creatures corrupted by emotion. They are emotional creatures occasionally guided by reason. And once reason loses its authority as the ultimate judge of truth, something else takes its place. Persuasion, narrative, psychology. Power no longer belongs to those with the strongest arguments, but to those who understand how belief is actually formed. Hume did not design systems of manipulation, but he revealed the blueprint, and in doing so, he unknowingly laid the foundation for a world where controlling minds would become easier than convincing them. Once certainty collapses, influence fills the vacuum, and that realization would change history. If reason is not the foundation of belief, then something else must be. This realization changes the question entirely. The problem is no longer how to think more logically, but how belief is actually formed inside the human mind. And when that question is taken seriously, the answer is unsettling. Belief is not governed by truth. It is governed by psychology. Human beings do not adopt ideas because they are correct. They adopt them because they are repeated, emotionally charged, socially reinforced, and delivered by perceived authority. Reason enters later, not as a judge, but as a defense attorney, justifying decisions already made. This is not a modern discovery. It is an ancient mechanism. Long before advertising agencies, political consultants, or algorithms, belief spread through ritual, myth, and repetition. Stories survived not because they were true, but because they were memorable. Tribes endured not because they were rational, but because they were unified by shared narratives. Hume's insight simply stripped away the romance. Once reason was dethroned, belief became predictable. Emotion is the first lever. Fear, desire, pride, resentment. These are far more persuasive than facts. An idea that threatens identity will be rejected regardless of evidence. An idea that flatters identity will be accepted with minimal scrutiny. Truth competes poorly against belonging. Repetition is the second lever. The human mind confuses familiarity with validity. What is heard often begins to feel natural. What feels natural begins to feel true. This is why slogans outperform arguments. Why headlines matter more than content. Why lies repeated confidently gain weight over time. Authority is the third lever. We trust voices that appear confident, prestigious, or dominant, not because they are correct, but because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Authority simplifies decision-making. It relieves the burden of independent judgment. And finally, social reinforcement. Beliefs are contagious. Agreement feels safe. Disagreement feels dangerous. The fear of exclusion shapes opinion more powerfully than logic ever could. To think differently is not merely intellectual risk, it is social risk. When these forces combine, reason becomes optional. This is how entire populations can believe contradictory things simultaneously. How intelligent individuals defend irrational systems. How moral certainty flourishes alongside moral blindness. The terrifying truth is not that people are manipulated. It is that they are easily persuadable by design. Modern society prides itself on rationality, data-driven decisions, scientific language, evidence-based policy. Yet this confidence masks a deeper vulnerability. The more a society believes it is rational, the less it guards against manipulation. Advertising does not argue. It associates. It attaches products to identity, desire, fear, and aspiration. Political rhetoric rarely persuades through logic. It mobilizes emotion and loyalty. Social media does not reward truth. It rewards engagement, outrage, and repetition. Algorithms do not care what is correct. They care what spreads. And what spreads fastest is not nuance, but certainty. Not doubt, but confidence. Not complexity, but simplicity. Hume warned that belief follows feeling, not reason. Modern systems simply optimize that insight at scale. What feels organic today is often engineered. What feels like independent thought is often guided. What feels like choice is frequently shaped long before awareness arrives. This does not require a grand conspiracy. It requires only an accurate model of human psychology. Manipulation is not new. What is new is its efficiency. The darkest irony is that education alone does not protect against this. Intelligence does not immunize the mind. In many cases, it makes rationalization more sophisticated. The smarter the individual, the more elaborate the justifications become. Belief, once formed, defends itself. And this leads to the most chilling realization of all. People are most predictable when they believe they are thinking freely. Certainty creates rigidity. Rigidity creates vulnerability. Those who never question their assumptions become easy to guide, easy to polarize, easy to mobilize. Those convinced of their rational superiority rarely notice how deeply emotional their convictions truly are. Hume's ideas were not absorbed as a warning. They were absorbed as a tool. Once belief was understood as psychological rather than logical. Influence replaced persuasion. Narrative replaced argument. Control no longer required force, only framing. And this leaves us with an uncomfortable question. If reason has limits, and belief is shaped by forces we barely notice, how does one live without becoming cynical, manipulable, or lost? If certainty is an illusion, what replaces it? Hume himself did not offer grand solutions. He offered restraint, humility, awareness of the mind's weaknesses, an acceptance that doubt is not a failure of thought, but a condition of being human. The danger is not skepticism. The danger is forgetting how easily belief is manufactured. And that question, how to live without illusions, now becomes unavoidable. When David Hume reached the edge of reason, he did not leap into despair. This is where many misunderstand him. Hume did not conclude that truth is meaningless, that morality is arbitrary, or that life collapses into chaos once certainty disappears. He concluded something far more restrained and far more difficult to accept, that human beings must live without foundations. Absolute certainty, he realized, is not available to creatures like us, not because we are ignorant, but because the mind itself is limited. Reason cannot justify its own assumptions. Logic cannot stand outside itself to validate its authority. And once this is seen clearly, the search for unshakable truth becomes a kind of intellectual vanity. But Hume did not respond by abandoning life. He responded by returning to it. If reason cannot ground meaning, then meaning must emerge elsewhere. From experience, from shared practices, from emotion, sympathy, and habit, from the fragile but real bonds between people. Morality, for Hume, was not a system deduced from logic. It was something felt, a sensitivity to suffering, a capacity for empathy, a natural inclination toward cooperation that arises not from rational proof, but from human psychology. This does not weaken morality. It humanizes it. Once moral certainty is no longer treated as absolute, cruelty becomes harder to justify. Fanaticism loses its mask. People stop believing they possess truth itself, and begin recognizing that they possess perspectives shaped by history, culture, and temperament. This is Hume's quiet radicalism. By accepting the limits of reason, the individual becomes less rigid, less dogmatic, less eager to dominate others in the name of certainty. Skepticism, when practiced properly, does not paralyze action, it softens judgment. It replaces arrogance with humility. In a world obsessed with being right, this humility is revolutionary. Living without illusions does not mean living without conviction. It means holding conviction lightly. Hume understood that doubt is not a flaw in thinking. It is a safeguard against intellectual tyranny. The moment someone claims absolute certainty, inquiry ends and power begins. This is why the most dangerous people in history were not those who doubted too much, but those who doubted too little. Hume's philosophy offers no grand system to believe in, no ideology to defend, no final answers to cling to. And that is precisely its strength. It resists possession. It cannot be weaponized easily. It demands self-awareness rather than obedience. In an age of manufactured outrage, ideological tribes, and algorithmic certainty, this restraint is desperately needed. Modern culture rewards confidence, speed, and simplicity. Doubt is seen as weakness, nuance as hesitation, humility as surrender. But Hume reminds us that the mind's greatest danger is not uncertainty. It is the illusion of certainty. Once you believe you are fully rational, you stop questioning your motivations. Once you believe your beliefs are purely logical, you stop noticing how deeply emotional they are. Once you assume your worldview is objective, you become blind to the forces shaping it. Hume's legacy is not a doctrine. It is a posture, a way of standing in the world without demanding it make sense on our terms. To live this way is uncomfortable. It means accepting ambiguity. It means resisting the comfort of absolute answers. It means recognizing that many of our deepest convictions are not proven truths, but inherited stories reinforced by habit and emotion. Yet there is freedom here. Freedom from fanaticism. Freedom from intellectual vanity. Freedom from the need to dominate others through certainty. The question we began with now returns, transformed. What if the most dangerous illusion is not ignorance, but believing we are fully rational? Hume does not ask us to abandon reason. He asks us to place it in its proper role, not as a ruler, not as a god, but as a tool, useful, limited, and deeply human. Once that illusion dissolves, something quieter emerges, awareness. And in that awareness, the world becomes less certain, but more honest, less controllable, but more humane. And perhaps that is the closest thing to wisdom we are ever meant to reach.